Explain like I'm 5. How do people find the queen when moving a beehive? With thousands of bees in a hive, how does one find the queen in all that activity? They look for an outlier. The queen is usually a different size, color, or has different markings. And everyone around her moves differently, so she stands out even more. The queen usually has 5 or 6 workers at any time facing her face to feed her. That's the arrangement that usually sticks out to me. Beekeeper here, with my whole one summer of experience. Some people mark queens. Basically, there's a little marker type of tool that will put a small colored dot on their back. The color corresponds to the year the queen was born to know her age. That's the easy way. Unmarked queens are definitely harder to find, but not super hard. Queens are longer, and their wings don't reach their butt like worker bees. I find that they are usually more of an orange color. And if you pull a frame out of a hive and see eggs and cells, that means the queen was there within the past day or so, and it's likely that the queen is on that frame or the next frame over. Another thing that can help you find a queen is if you hear her making a piping noise. I believe there is some debate on why they do it, but one theory is to call out to other recently hatched queens to find each other and fight. Regardless of the reason for the sound, that is another thing that can help you locate them. I've read it's fairly rare to hear. I was lucky to hear it last summer and record it with my phone. Not sure what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't, "We hit him with the Sharpie." The hive will cluster around the queen to protect her, so you follow the bees that seem to be following other bees. In the middle will be a completely different bee. That's the queen. Edit. Balling and clustering are different behaviors with specific meanings. And I'm too sleepy to remember the one I wanted. Explain like I'm 5. How would Chinese EVs be a security threat to Americans? I understand it's an issue with the software and that it could collect data such as tracking users via GPS. But how would that information get transmitted back to the Chinese, and how would they use that data? I do understand the privacy concern, but how is that a security threat for the country? I saw an interview with the Commerce Secretary today, and she said that they, the Chinese, would also have the ability to shut off EVs at will. How would that work? A lot of people are saying the conversation is just a ruse because the American auto industry fears low-cost Chinese EVs. We already have Section 301 tariffs in place for Chinese goods, so I don't know that I buy that argument 100%. If the EVs are controlled by computers, and China can change the code for those computers via wireless connection, then it can be a massive security risk. China could potentially do things like disable all the cars, disable safety features on the cars, access the microphones used to make calls, access cameras in or on the cars, know who owns each car and where each car is and has ever been, know the phone number and full contact list and each call made using a cell phone via the car's Bluetooth connection, etc. So, not only could China potentially physically harm people, the data they collect could be used for nefarious purposes. When you know all about a congressman's secret affair, or that a well-respected conservative preacher has a teenage boyfriend unbeknownst to his congregation or his wife and 3 kids, or a scientist working on cutting-edge drone tech sometimes looks at naked young girls on the dark web, that information can be used to coerce or blackmail people. And that is perhaps the biggest security concern about allowing a foreign government to spy on American citizens through their own vehicles. What's stopping the US government from doing the same thing? Nothing. They already do it. The main difference is that US politicians want to keep America alive, semi-stable, making money, and keeping them in power, which limits the amount of sabotage they'll do while enriching themselves. No point ruling over ashes. Meanwhile, Chinese politicians want to completely destabilize, weaken, and if possible, completely destroy the country so they can expand their economic and military powers globally. Government is still a threat, but the potential for damage is lower. Explain like I'm 5. Does freezing something reset the expiration date? I know use by and best by dates aren't set in stone. It's okay to drink milk a day or 2 past the expiration date, but let's pretend for a minute that they are set and definite. Let's say I buy a package of steaks on July 1st, and the expiration date is July 15. I put them in the freezer as soon as I get home, and leave them there until August 1st. Is the expiration now August 15, or do I need to use them as quickly as possible? I'm not potentially going to expose myself to foodborne illnesses. It's just a question that sat in the back of my mind for a while. You can think of freezing food as pausing or extending the expiration date, rather than resetting it. That's why it usually says use or freeze by with the date, but even though things won't rot in a freezer, they will still lose quality over time as ice crystals build up and moisture is removed. That's freezer burn. I use one of those, but even then, things get nasty after a while. I don't pay much attention to use by dates, but I would consider that freezing halts the clock. So if you freeze with 1 day on the clock, you still have that day when you thaw it out. This is the answer. It's a pause button. If there's a day left on expiration, there'll be a day left when you thaw it. And note that freezing isn't a magic solution. Any water in the food will crystallize and tear apart your food like miniature knives and make it mushy when thawed. It depends on how the food spoils, rancidity or bacterially. Freezing food can at best pause the spoiling process. Rancidity is when the food spoils through a chemical process, like milk spoiling. Pasteurized milk has no bacteria in it, but the chemicals that make up the milk can still react, spoiling the milk. It's perfectly safe to drink, but it tastes awful. Not all rancid food is safe to eat. Milk is just one example. Bacterially is when bacteria eats your food and poops in it. That poop is toxic. Even if you kill the bacteria, the poop is still there. I'm lumping mold in with this too. In both cases, freezing the food slows the process, sometimes stops it, but it depends on the food. Also, if the freezer ever warms up and the food thaws, losing power for example, the clock starts again, even if it cools down again without you ever opening the freezer. Explain like I'm 5. Why do modern Gore Tex shell jackets have layers outside the Gore Tex membrane? Modern Gore Tex and similar shell jackets often are marketed as being 2 or sometimes 3-layer construction, with the Gore Tex membrane being one of the layers. Often the outer layer isn't actually waterproof and can soak through. If Gore Tex is the main functional layer, why does there have to be extra material layers facing the elements? Same reason why you can't use a fork on a nonstick pan. Gore Tex is actually Teflon, the same stuff they use on nonstick pans. Teflon isn't that strong of a material, so they layer it to protect it. Also, fun fact, the Gore Tex patent expired decades ago. A lot of other stuff is made of PFTE Teflon these days, and Gore Tex isn't particularly special anymore. Second fun fact, PFTE is pretty bad for the environment. Gore Tex themselves are trying to move away from it, and some of their newer products labeled Gore Tex don't actually contain it. Third thought, a lot of coat manufacturers still use Gore Tex and have to pay a licensing fee, even though the patent has expired, because that name still appeals to buyers who don't know better. There is literally better technology, or at least equal to Gore Tex, but because it's so synonymous to consumers, it's still making money. Gore Tex enforces certain garment standards, which means a Gore Tex jacket should be a minimum quality level. True, but if you get a garment from a reputable brand that does their own waterproofing, it should be fine. Boots with Keendry instead of Gore Tex are just fine, for example. Because the waterproof membrane is roughly the same as Teflon tape and has all the resilience of tissue paper, but is also the main expense in the jacket. The old Packlight was about as minimal as they could go, and they discontinued it because it just wasn't durable. And it's only expensive because of the brand name. The knockoff Gore Tex is the same material, since the original Gore Tex was super bad for the environment, and they had to swap to the knockoff formula, but keep the name. Think of it like a sandwich, with the jam being the Gore Tex membrane. Top layer, the protective shell which defends the membrane from abrasions. It's usually coated in DWR, durable water repellent, which is the chemical used to make water bead off the jacket. Middle layer, the Gore Tex membrane, which is fully waterproof yet breathable. Bottom layer, the layer of fabric that touches your body. It's usually a softer material for comfort and protects the membrane from sweat and grime from your skin. Often people think their jacket is no longer waterproof because water has stopped beading off of it. This is just because the DWR has worn off or is dirty. Wash your Gore Tex. Drier settings on high heat will rejuvenate it. Source, I worked for Arc'teryx. Well, that's another episode of Explain Like I'm 5 in the books. I really appreciate all of you who made it this far into the video. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, it would really help the channel out a lot if you gave the video a thumbs up, subscribe, or leave a comment down below. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.